or they were just scary and we didn't want to deal with them until now we have to.
We saved all of Wayne's questions to last.
Right. The really difficult, or maybe it just took us this long to figure out the answer. I don't know, but so we're going to go through them. We're answering 5 questions that were asked of us. They're not necessarily tied to each other or relate to each other in any way. Other than that, they were asked by you, and so we want to answer them. And then starting next week, we've got a couple of one-off sermons, and then we're going to be getting ready for our Easter series, which is going to be exciting. We're going to be talking about the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus Christ. You know, what can we learn after his ministry was quote-unquote done? What can we learn from who he appeared to? That sort of thing. So that's going to be exciting. But let's take a look at, is it my turn? You go first.
I go first.
You go first. You want me to run this thing?
Me first.
All right, let's see if this works. Or, I don't know, is Wayne going to run it or am I going to run it? I'm not.
It worked just fine for me last service. I don't know what the deal is.
Maybe it's me. Me and technology. Yeah. So. All
right, question number 1. If God is evil, if God isn't evil, maybe you should go first.
Yeah. That wasn't the question that we got.
That's not the question. Hold on. I want to look at this one. I know. Is this the third one? Wow. Okay, I'm going to look down, and that's a long ways away again. If God is not evil, how did he create the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Okay? That's a question that came in. Now, we answered earlier in the series a question like this one, which was, why did God create the tree of knowledge of good and evil? And the answer to that one was because of our ability to choose. God wanted us to choose to love him or to deny him. He didn't want to force us into a relationship with him. Okay? What kind of relationship would it be if we were forced to worship him anyways, right? We'd be doing it because we had to, not because we got to. It was no longer a privilege of ours, but another daily thing that we had to do.
An obligation.
So, yeah, it was an obligation. Okay? So the first thing I want to eliminate is the idea that the tree is evil. Because the tree is not evil. So that's the first thing, okay? God did not create the tree to be evil, but he created it to give us the choice to choose evil if that's what our heart desired. And clearly, Adam and Eve, they did that. I like to blame Adam and Eve for the fall of man and everything we go through. I always thought it'd be cool if they were sitting up there on the way into heaven. They had a sign that said, "I'm sorry," and gave people high fives on the way in,
That's their penance.
Yeah, everyone that comes in, we're sorry. But to be honest, if I was placed in that situation, I would have done the same thing because I have the same nature that they have, which is to defy God and go for my own desires. Okay? So God didn't create the evil, but he allowed it to happen. He allowed Adam and Eve to choose a different way than what God had planned for them. Okay? He created the free will, and with the free will came the capacity of us to understand and know what evil was, what it was to be separated from God. The reason it was called the tree of knowledge of good and evil is because once we ate from it, we understood what it was like to actually be parted from God, away from his will, to be separated from the design he had for us. We then understood this is what it was and this is what I'm choosing. So the tree wasn't evil, but we chose to be evil by eating from the tree. Okay? And it all came because God gave us the choice to choose, which is a really gracious thing. Some people look at that and they're like, man, if God wouldn't have done that, there wouldn't have been all this. But really, it was an act of love for him to step out and say, I'm going to let them choose me or not.
Yeah, the doctrine of free will is an important thing to understand because without it, then not only does it remove our choice and remove our, I would even go so far as to say, if there is no choice, can there be love? You think about if you have no choice, then do you really love, or is it just an obligation? So I'm thankful that God gave us that free choice. All right, so the second question, which yes, thank you very much for this. I told Pastor Albert, I said, if you ever leave, he's gone on vacation. He's down in Texas visiting with his daughter, and he left on the week that we had daylight savings time, the full moon, Friday the 13th, and the coronavirus scare. and the Sunday where we have to answer the question of why aren't women pastors? I told him, I said, if you ever leave on a week like that again, I will kill you. I said, that's not fair. But okay, why aren't there women pastors? This was a question that was asked by one of our children. One of our children asked our children's director, said, why don't we see women's pastors or women as pastors? And so this is one of those questions that can go one way or another depending on which church you're in. And quite frankly, it's kind of a hot button issue in our society today because of how we've gotten to where we are. And so I want to take a break here for a minute, and I want to show you a short video that does a pretty good job of explaining the biblical approach to it, and then I'm going to come in and give some caveats to that. All right.
Can a woman be a pastor or preacher? There's perhaps no more hotly debated issue in the church today than the issue of women serving as pastors or preachers. As a result, it is very important to not see this issue as men versus women. There are women who believe women should not serve as pastors and that the Bible places restrictions on the ministry of women. And there are men who believe women can serve as preachers and that there are no restrictions on women in ministry. This is not an issue of chauvinism or discrimination. It is an issue of biblical interpretation. The Word of God proclaims a woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She must be silent. In the church, God assigns different roles to men and women. This is a result of the way mankind was created and the way in which sin entered the world. God, through the Apostle Paul, restricts women from serving in roles of leadership and/or having spiritual authority over men. This precludes women from serving as pastors over men, which definitely includes preaching to them, teaching them publicly, and exercising spiritual authority over them. There are many objections to this view of women in pastoral ministry. A common one is that Paul restricts women from teaching because in the first century, women were typically uneducated. However, 1 Timothy 2:11-14 nowhere mentions educational status. If education were a qualification for ministry, then the majority of Jesus' disciples would have not been qualified. A second common objection is that Paul only restricted the women of Ephesus from teaching men. 1 Timothy was written to Timothy, the pastor of the church in Ephesus. Ephesus was known for its temple to Artemis, and women were the authorities in that branch of paganism. Therefore, the theory goes, Paul was only reacting against the female-led customs of the Ephesian idolaters, and the church needed to be different. However, the book of 1 Timothy nowhere mentions Artemis, nor does Paul mention the standard practice of Artemis worshippers as a reason for the restrictions in 1 Timothy 2:11-12. A third objection is that Paul is only referring to husbands and wives, not men and women in general. The Greek words for woman and man in 1 Timothy 2 could refer to husbands and wives. However, the basic meaning of the words is broader than that. Further, the same Greek words are used in verses 8-10. Are only husbands to lift up holy hands in prayer without anger and disputing? Verse 8. Are only wives to dress modestly, have good deeds, and worship God? Verses 9-10. Of course not. Verses 8-10 clearly refer to all men and women, not just husbands and wives. There is nothing in the context that would indicate a narrowing to husbands and wives in verses 11-14. Yet another objection is in the relation to women who held positions of leadership in the Bible, specifically Miriam, Deborah, and Huldah in the Old Testament. It is true that these women were chosen by God for special service to Him, and that they stand as models of faith, courage, and yes, leadership. However, the authority of women in the Old Testament is not relevant to the issue of pastors in the church. The New Testament epistles present a new paradigm for God's people, the church, the body of Christ. And that paradigm involves an authority structure unique to the church, not for the nation of Israel or any other Old Testament entity. The structure of 1 Timothy 2:11-14 makes the reason why women cannot be pastors perfectly clear. Verse 13 begins with 4, giving the cause of Paul's statement in verses 11-12. Why should women not teach or have authority over men? Because Adam was created first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived, it was the woman who was deceived. Verses 13-14. God created Adam first, and then created Eve to be a helper for Adam. The order of creation has universal application in the family and in the church. Many women excel in gifts of hospitality, mercy, teaching, evangelism, and helps. Much of the ministry of the local church depends on women. Women in the church are not restricted from public praying or prophesying. The Bible nowhere restricts women from exercising the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Women, just as much as men, are called to minister to others, to demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit, and to proclaim the gospel to the lost. So, can women be pastors or preachers? No. According to the Bible, women are not allowed to serve as pastors over men. That does not change the fact that God uses women in powerful and amazing ways to accomplish great things in the kingdom of God.
Okay, so let me clarify a couple of things, and I even want to disagree with one thing that we saw up there. When he was answering the question, can women be pastors, he changed it to women are forbidden from leadership and spiritual authority over men, or leadership in general. I do not believe that women are forbidden from positions of leadership. As a matter of fact, he goes on to say that women have every right to exercise their spiritual gifts, and one of those spiritual gifts that is given by God is the gift of leadership. So you will see, and not only in our church, but hopefully in other churches that are following scriptural guidelines, you will see women in leadership all over the place. We have our missions director is a woman. We have one of our CR directors is a lady. Our fellowship director is a lady. Our children's director is a lady. You look at our leadership team when we have our leadership team meetings, half of the room is filled with women. So it's not that women are not allowed to be in a position of leadership. It's that the Bible is saying, listen, the ultimate position of leadership for the local church is what? The pastor, right? So in that one case, we're asking that be a God-fearing, God-honoring man, okay? And I believe that part of the thing that the video didn't go into very well, it kind of mentioned at the end, God's design for the family kind of sets the tone for how it is for our churches. And I think that's in my view, I would have made the video primarily about that. Not so much that it's a punishment for being deceived first, because quite frankly, Adam was standing right there with Eve, right? He was deceived as well, right? And it wasn't just, it wasn't just part of the curse or whatever. Although there is part of the curse, when God said, you will have pain in childbearing. Is that the only curse that was pronounced on the woman? You guys remember what the other one was? It says, you will long for your husband, but he will rule over you. I believe that's the greater curse, right? That's the greater curse that women suffer with in this world, is that having someone having that position of authority over you. And so that's how God designed the family. If God designed the man to be the spiritual head of the family, how can we turn that on its head when it comes to the church? It's very simple. It's we men, we need to step up. We need to understand that we are put in a position of held accountable. Not so much that we're put into a position of great authority, but we understand that whenever God gives you accountability for something, he also gives you a measure of authority to go with it. I was at a marriage conference one time, and they took a survey of all of us. We all had to take the survey, and the women's survey was a little bit different than the men's survey. And then in the second session, they talked about the results of that. The number one, on the survey, they found out that the number one thing that women were looking for in their relationship, the thing that they marked the most, and they said this happens at all the conferences that we do, the number one thing that women were looking for in their relationship was security and protection. And the lady who was leading the second conference, she said, okay, I'm speaking to the women now. She said, ladies, if that is true, you have to let your husband lead. He cannot protect you from behind you. And that was a profound statement as far as I was concerned. We are the ones, the men are the ones, we're supposed to be the one in front, but that means we're the ones taking the arrows. That means we're the one, shielding our family and leading them as they're supposed to go. And our women the women in our lives are supposed to be the ones supporting us and helping us with that. Now, I also want to say this has nothing to do with value or worth. It's not that men are more valuable than women are in the eyes of God. As a matter of fact, Romans talks about how there is no partiality with God. Neither Jew, nor Greek, nor male, nor female, nor, it doesn't matter, right? God sees us all as equally valuable, but there is such a thing as different roles that we play. So the last thing I would like to say about this is the reason why this is the way we go as a church is because, number one, because the Bible said so, right? And because it's also the most effective way. Now, to give you an example of that, one of my favorite statistics, you may have heard me say this before, but if a child comes to faith, there's a 3% chance the rest of the family will come to faith as well. In other words, if a child gets saved at our VBS, send them home, and they're going to tell mommy and daddy and brother and sister, hey, I met Jesus, and here, let me tell you what happened to me. There's a 3% chance the rest of the family will come to know faith as well. If a mother comes to faith, it's a 14% chance the rest of the family will. So that's way more, it's triple what it would be, or quadruple what it would be for a child. So that's great. Do you know what it is when a father comes to faith? It's a 93% chance the rest of the family will come to faith as well. Is that by accident? Or did God know what he was doing? You know, God understood it. He said, this is the way I've organized the family. And so therefore, what we do is we take that and we say, okay, we're gonna apply that to the church as well. I asked a woman pastor one time. We were at a pastor's gathering, and she was the pastor of a church up in Oregon that allowed women pastors and everything. And I asked her, I said, I'm curious, what do you do when you get to Ephesians 5 and 6? I said, how do you preach through that? And she said, well, those are some of the most misinterpreted scriptures in the Bible, and so we try to leave those alone. Basically, she said, well, I just don't. I said, because what it would do is it would put her in a position that says the man is supposed to be the spiritual head of the household, just not mine. Right? As the pastor of the church, she would be in the overall position of authority over her own husband. She would be violating God's rule for her family, so she just didn't preach it. I thought that is an indication right there that we've got something out of whack here. There's a reason why God designed things a certain way. Okay, does that make sense?
That was good.
Can we move on?
Yeah, that was good.
Oh, please.
Nice work.
Please don't hate me or send. My email address is acharris.
Yeah.
No, wait, that's Dad's. No. Send your complaints to. All right, next question. Oh, this is a fun one.
Yeah, Matthew 12:40 says Jesus would be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. How is that possible if he was crucified on Friday and risen on Sunday? This is one of those good questions. We actually couldn't fit the whole question on the slide, so I'm going to read you the whole thing really quick for you here. It says, Matthew 12:40 says that Jesus would be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights after his crucifixion and before his resurrection. Since he was already risen early Sunday morning, that would mean that he had to be crucified on Wednesday, not Good Friday. The rub is that they hurried to bury him before the Sabbath started at 6 p.m. on the day of his crucifixion. That must mean there was a non-Saturday Sabbath that week. What was the holy day Sabbath on that Thursday? That's the question. This is one of those Wayne questions that we saved for last, right? I picked
Don't throw him under the bus.
I did it first service. He's already rolling. Might as well go.
All
with
right,
it.
okay. Sorry, Wayne. They were supposed to be anonymous.
I mean, Wayne didn't write that one.
Sounds like something Wayne would say, though.
It does, right?
All right, let's move on.
All right, so there are two theories. There are two crucifixion theories that go. There's a Friday theory, and then there is the 2 Sabbath Wednesday theory. I loved this question, though, and that's I did give Wayne kudos because for 27 and 9/10 of my life, 27
Years.
9 years, 0.9. My birthday's this month.
For almost all of your life. Okay.
Almost all of my life. Yeah. I just went along with, Good Friday. We celebrate Good Friday. God must have been crucified on Friday, and he rose on Sunday. It made perfect sense to me. Didn't question it, think about it, or look at it at all. And I totally got to learn about another theory that's out there. So let's go. This is the theory that I had for my life here was the 3 days, the Friday view. The Friday view is that Jesus was crucified on Friday, sometime before 6 p.m., because I also learned that at 6 p.m., that is when the day ended, because when the sun went down, that completed the day. So they started the Sabbath celebration Friday.
The Jewish calendar would say once the sun goes down, that day is over, we've started the next one. Well, where we do it in the middle of the night where everybody's asleep anyway, they would do it when the sun went down. Okay, now we're on the next day. Right.
So Jesus would have been crucified on Friday. That night and Friday would have been, that night and Saturday would have been the Sabbath. And then sometime on Sunday morning, he would have risen, okay, on the 3rd day. Now, in the Jewish minds of the 1st century, anything that touched part of the day would have been considered a full day. So if you worked for from 5 to 6 on Friday, and then you would have worked Friday. It would have been considered a day. And then Saturday would be considered a day, and then the part of Sunday would also be considered a day. So if you look, Jesus, this year would have been viewed as 3 days, as he would have been crucified sometime before 6 o'clock on Friday. He would have been gone Friday night, and then all day Saturday, and then Saturday night, and then all day Sunday. That would account for the 3 days of Jesus being crucified.
Or honestly, anything past 6 p.m. on Saturday.
Right.
So if he would have resurrected at 7 p.m. on Saturday night, the way they view the calendar, that still would have been Sunday. That would have been the third day.
Right. I adopted their calendar. I was like, yeah, Saturday, then Sunday.
Yeah.
That's nice. Cool.
I like it.
The thing that was interesting is that the verse in Matthew, when Jesus said, the sign he was going to give would be 3 days and 3 nights. This one didn't account, the Friday didn't account for the 3 nights, which I did think was kind of interesting as I was going through this. So the second view is the 2 Sabbath crucified on Wednesday. The way that this would work would mean that Jesus would have been crucified Wednesday before 6 p.m., and he would have resurrected sometime Saturday before 6 p.m., right?
Nope. Sometime after Saturday, 6 p.m.
After Saturday, 6 p.m.
Which would still be Sunday.
Still technically Sunday.
Yep.
Right. See? It confuses
It's confusing.
me. I'm used to
I know.
ours. Midnight's good. That's why they have us asleep for it, so we don't have to think about
That's
it
right.
too much.
Because nobody wants to think about what day is it now.
Right. So, could there have been another Sabbath that was celebrated, aside from the every week Saturday Sabbath? Well, yes. In Leviticus chapter 16, it says, "This shall be a permanent statute for you. In the 7th month, on the 10th day, it is to be a Sabbath of solemn rest to you." I liked the one that you use about Christmas. Christmas is a day that we celebrate. If it doesn't fall on a weekend, we still take the day off and we rest and we celebrate Jesus' birth.
So it's a major holiday.
A major holiday, which then became a day that we celebrated for Jesus here. And this could have been what happened here. This Thursday could have been another holiday that was celebrated as the Sabbath. So it would satisfy the account that Jesus was crucified before the Sabbath, right? And then rose again on the 3rd day.
Now, specifically, we're talking about the Passover, right? When we had the Lord's Supper and everything, what were they celebrating? The Passover, right? The Passover was a major holiday in the Jewish faith. So it's not inconceivable for that to be considered as a extra Sabbath if it were to fall on that Thursday. And what it does is it makes some room for some other things that couldn't really make sense in any other way.
Right, so we read about the ladies who picked up the spices and prepared them to take to Jesus' tomb.
Yeah, one verse says the day after the Sabbath, the women bought the spices. Another verse says, then they returned and prepared the spices and perfumes, and on the Sabbath they rested. So think about that for a moment. How could they buy the spices after the Sabbath and then prepare them and then rest before the Sabbath? Yes. Yeah. With what? Okay. It could be for the same reason. Could be for the same reason.
Learned again.
Yeah.
I'm learning all over the place, which is good. Okay, so if he was crucified on Wednesday, then it satisfies the crucified before the Sabbath. It also satisfies that they would have celebrated the Sabbath on Thursday. Friday, the ladies would have been able to buy the spices and prepare them, and then rested on Saturday and
The other Sabbath.
The other Sabbath, the regularly
The regular
scheduled.
one. Yeah.
And then
Back to our regularly scheduled Sabbath.
right. And then Sunday morning, taking them to Jesus. This also, you go ahead and go, gives us our full 3 days. He would have been in the tomb Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And it also gives us our 3 nights, as he would have been Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday.
So let's
cool.
settle the whole thing. Which one is right? It doesn't really matter? Does it change what Jesus did on the cross?
No.
Does it change how he paid for our sins? Does certain things make better sense? Okay. There's another problem with this one on the road to Emmaus, one of those post-resurrection experiences. He's talking to the disciples on the road. They don't recognize that it's Jesus, and they ask him, "Do you not know what's been going on? This person Jesus who was crucified 3 days ago." Well, this was on Sunday, and it wouldn't have been Wednesday, right? So there's different things where maybe it was this works, maybe the other one works too. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't change what Jesus did on the cross, and it doesn't change the effect that it had on all of us. We can still place our faith. Now, it's good for an intellectual argument, and it's good to go through and oh, well, this makes sense with this. And like Brandon said, man, we had fun learning about it and seeing how things fit together. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't change our faith one bit. Now, we could go out there and we could try to start a movement and say, hey, let's make it Good Wednesday instead of Good Friday. We may not have very much success with that, because Friday is the universally accepted one. But
Right.
anyway.
It's still good. It was really good. I do notice we can get caught up real fast on minor details like this and get caught up and forget about what it is that Jesus actually did for us, what this is really about.
Yep.
And so.
Speaking of getting minor details and that sort of thing, our next question was talking about if Jesus was to be from the house of David and Joseph was from the house of David, but Joseph wasn't technically Jesus' father, how could Jesus be from the house of David? Okay? So let's look at that for a second. Do we know that Joseph was from the house of David? Yes, we have a genealogy in Matthew that explains who Joseph's father was, going all the way back through all the generations, all the way through David. Okay, so we understand that yes, Joseph was from the house of David. And Joseph, while maybe not his biological father, Joseph was his legal father, was he not? Yes, sir. Yeah, you're jumping ahead of me. Yeah, it's already up on the screen too, right? So,
Yep.
but let's talk about Joseph. Was Joseph his biological father? No. Was he his legal father? Yes. Was he his adoptive father? Yes. Joseph had adopted him as his own son. And so we've learned in other places that in Jewish days, adoption was just as strong as biological link. As a matter of fact, adoption could be even stronger, because you could disown a biological son. You could not legally disown an adopted son. Basically, legally, they said you've already made up your mind when you adopted him. He's yours now, for here and forever. Okay, so he would have been covered as a part of the house of David through the adoption of that. But if you don't like that answer, well, you can go to Luke chapter 3. Luke chapter 3 gives us a different genealogy. It's actually the genealogy of Mary. You can see tracking through Mary and her how she descended, that she's also from the house of David as well. So Jesus is covered either way. It fulfills the prophecy that he was from the house of David. Okay? All right, let's move on to our last one. Our last question. And this one is a fun one as well. Why do we hurt? Why do we hurt? I was watching a stupid movie the other day. It was Batman versus Superman. Have you guys seen that one? It's not a very. But Lex Luthor, one of his little speeches was he decided a long time ago that God could either he wasn't all powerful or he wasn't all good. Because if he was all good, there wouldn't be evil in this world. So he must not be all powerful. And if he's all powerful, then he must not be all good, because he allows so much pain in the world. Guys, believe it or not, that's a common belief among secular people, among outside of the church. Because they can't fathom, they can't marry this idea of a loving God who loves us all and still allows all of us to hurt so much. So this is a poignant question. Why do we hurt? I want you to think about that for a minute. What do you guys think? Why do we hurt so much? Yes. Okay. Physical pain it's a good way to know that I shouldn't do that anymore. Can you imagine if you never felt any physical pain? you imagine what damage you would do to your body? Think about the things that you do this. What are you doing? You're saving yourself from further injury. Can you imagine if you didn't? Imagine, there's actually people in this world that have the disorder where they don't feel physical pain, and they are getting cut and burned, and they're doing so much damage to their body because the pain is what tells them, hey, stop doing that. Can you imagine if you put your hand on a burner and couldn't feel physical pain? What would happen?
Well, the kids, we learned about that in psychology class, and kids would feel the texture of their eye, but not feel any pain, so they'd kind of morbid, but they'd pick their eye out because
Scratch and all
because
that.
they didn't know when to stop because
Right. Okay, so that's good. Why else do we hurt? To glorify God? How does our hurt glorify God? Okay. How good is good if you don't have bad to compare it to?
right.
If you don't know, if you've never, this is in all of our lives, if we don't really know how good we have it until we go through a bad time, right? And then all of a sudden we're thinking back to the good old days, that sort of thing. Well, let's talk about this. Number one of the reasons why we hurt is because we live in a fallen world, right? And our sin affects people around us. I want you to understand that. Even though 99.999999, the only reason, I can't think of a sin that isn't selfishly motivated, right? All of our sin is selfishly motivated, but we need to understand that all of our sin has an effect on the people around us. You see, when I steal for selfish reasons, I'm hurting someone that I stole from. Or if I'm buying too much toilet paper and now nobody else can get any, I'm hurting them. I wouldn't know anything about that, right? If I'm doing something, even something that's sexually immoral, if I'm by myself watching pornography, am I really hurting anyone? What about that person that's being victimized in that video? What about that person that's going through that? That's what they're having to do to earn money, because they know that somebody is going to pay for it. Guys, there's always someone that is being hurt by my sin. So one of the reasons why we hurt is because everyone around us, Romans 3:23 says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So everyone who's a sinner, us included, we are hurting the people around us. We are causing other people pain. That's one of the reasons why we hurt.
There's something to kind of go along with that is I was chatting with Keith about one of the examples I used a long time ago, and I was talking about when my kids were born, and they were born at 2 pounds, 7 ounces, 2 pounds, 11 ounces, super early because they had a condition called twin transfusion syndrome, which is where one baby will take the nutrients from the other baby, and one doesn't get enough food, and the other one's heart has to work extra hard to pump through the extra blood vessels. And if not caught in time, it can be fatal for one and potentially fatal for both. And we were very blessed to have a doctor who caught it super early in our boys. And if you see them now, they're just as toddler boyish as any other toddler boy
Right.
is out there. I don't have one not broken thing in my house.
They're little tornadoes.
Right. But while we were in the hospital, we were there for 3 months, and we got to see a lot of people come and go from the NICU. And there was a couple next to us whose twins had the same thing, but they weren't as fortunate to catch it as early as we were. And after surgeries, their baby actually didn't make it. And I was asked, well, how come God would choose your baby over someone else's baby? Or, why would God so lovingly take this baby away from this family? And I was chatting with Keith, and it was so cool to think that we don't always get to see the bigger picture. God could have been protecting that family from a pain that would have been so much worse, or it could have been stretched out over a long period of time and ended in a different way, that God was actually mercifully taking that baby's life. And we just don't get to see all of everything that God's doing. We don't get to see the behind the scenes of everything. So that was a really good.
Another reason why we
reminder.
hurt is because we make poor choices, don't we? There's a reason. Does God forgive us of our sin? Yes, but will God allow us to experience the consequences of our sin? Yeah, if I were to do something, if I were to go out and let's say I were to rob a bank and I were to get caught and I get sent to jail, if I prayed to God from jail, would God forgive me of that sin? Mm-hmm. If I prayed, Lord, please forgive me and set me free, would he also set me free in that moment? Not if he's a just God, right? We want God to be a loving God, but we also want him to be a just God. If we had a judge who just said, you know what, dude, you're my friend, and I think you're cool, and so even though you did this bad thing, I'm going to let you go for free, would we consider him a good judge? No, we would consider, hey, that's favoritism. That is not justice. And yet that's what we expect from God. So God is a good judge. He loves us, but he also is going to allow us to experience the pain and the consequences of our own sin. Why? To teach us, right? To teach us. Okay. Yep.
Right.
That's true. It's true. It's true. But we're still going to have the consequence of our sin is we're still going to have to spend a certain amount of time in that, right? And we do the same thing all the time. We make stupid choices all the time. And God allows us to feel the pain of our stupid choices, even though he can forgive us of our sin, because that's how we learn, right? When you have a child that's jumping on the couch and you say, don't jump on the couch, don't jump on the couch, don't jump on the couch. Why? Well, because you're going to hurt yourself. You know, honestly, when that child then falls and hurts themselves, should we rush over and be like, oh, let me take care of it? No, honestly, sometimes you need to let them make the mistake so that they'll learn and not do it over and over and over again, right?
How many
allows us to do
times does
that.
it take for them to learn?
I don't know.
My kids.
Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, right? We can suffer from our own choices. We can also suffer for Christ. Guys, there's a lot of churches in our world today that leave this doctrine out, but it's found all the way through Scripture. That we are called to suffer, to share in the sufferings of Christ. Just because we suffer doesn't mean it's because we've been sinful and we're being punished. If you guys remember when Jesus was talking about remember the 18 people that died in the tower collapse, and he even uses them, he said, did they die because of their sin? No. Jesus himself said it wasn't because they had done something sinful. That was an accident that happened. It was a modern day thing for them. We don't fully understand the whole story of it. But he was basically making the point that it wasn't just because they had been sinful that they were being punished. Guys, sometimes we suffer for Christ. God allows us to go through things that will refine us. James 1:1-12 talks about this idea of this refining fire. And we were going through this in my life group just a couple weeks ago. And Francis Chan was teaching us on a video, and he brought up this idea of this silversmith who was refining his silver. And what he would do is he would put all the silver in a pot, and then he would surround it by extreme heat. Does extreme heat sound like a fun thing for any of us? No. Okay, so he was putting it through the trauma of melting it and then what would happen is all the impurities, the things that weren't silver, the things that weren't supposed to be there would rise to the top, and the silversmith would scrape all those impurities off. Now here's the thing. It took more than one smelting. It took more than one time. And then he would have to let it cool and that sort of thing. He would have to put that same silver through the same process multiple times. And there would be more and more impurities that would come up. And he would scrape them off the surface. Do you know how the silversmith knew he was done? How he would finally purify the silver? It wasn't until he could see his own reflection in that liquid silver that he knew that it was pure. Guys, isn't that a great analogy for how God allows us to go through hard times? Think about how do we react to difficult things? You know, do we react in anger? Do we react in, oh, I'm going to get them, or my daughter was driving the other day, and there was somebody following very close behind us, and she was like, Dad, I'm really fighting this urge to brake check this guy. You know what a brake check is? you suddenly slam on your brakes and you take the risk of them slamming into you, but they would be in the wrong and insurance would pay for it. No, right? But I was like, honey, no, we can't do that. I said, remember, don't let how they're driving affect how we're driving. And I looked in the rearview mirror and it was a white Dodge pickup. I said, besides, that might be your grandfather. But, how do we react? How do we react to things like the scare that's going on around us today? Are we reacting in faith, in trusting that God is knowing? Or are we going around like our hair's on fire because we think the world is about to end? How are we reacting? You see, every time we go through a difficulty, how we react shows where our impurities still are. Where are we lacking in faith? Where are we lacking in surrender and giving God control? Where are we still gripping onto things? Those are still things that God is going to allow us to go through in order to continue to refine us until the only thing he sees when he looks at us is a reflection of himself. So sometimes we suffer for Christ.
Romans 8:18. This is such an inspirational verse here. Let's read here. It says, For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared to the glory that is to be revealed to us. You look outside right now and you look at the way that things are happening. It's not just the virus that's going around, but other things, the abortion laws that are being passed and the just all these things that aren't biblical that are just going through, and we're Christians it's being more and more difficult for us to proclaim our faith without fear because of the persecution that seems to be coming around the corner. And I love this here because the trials that we are going through now will not even touch the glory that we are going to experience later. And that is awesome.
Does the hope and glory that we have in front of us, should that change the way we live today? Most of you guys know that I'm a Packers fan, right? Don't judge me.
Everyone has problems.
Hey, did the Broncos make the playoffs this year? That's all I have to say. No, all right. I'm a Packers fan, and there was a couple. I think it was 2 years ago. Up in Oregon when I was pastoring a church up there, I didn't get to see all the Packer games in real time. Sometimes I had to wait until the following day because they were during church services and that sort of thing. And so I was always trying to get people, don't tell me the score. Don't tell me the score, because I'm going to watch it tomorrow on the Game Pass or whatever, and I want to watch it not knowing what's going to happen. And there was one Sunday where the game started at like 11, so I knew I was going to miss the first half, but I was going to be able to catch the second half. But I was trying to get everybody, please don't tell me, please don't tell me. Well, sure enough, as I was standing there shaking hands, as people were walking out the door, we had one guy, his name was Nick. Those guys named Nick. Anyway, as he was shaking my hand, he said, can you believe they pulled it out? Can you believe they won in the end? And I was like, dude, I recorded it. I'm going to go home and watch. It wasn't him, right? But you know what happened in that game? We were playing the Bears, and we were down 24-0 at halftime. I went home, and I watched, and it's like, normally, if my team is down 24-0 at halftime, I'm thinking of other things to do with the rest of my afternoon. You know what I'm talking about? Thinking, oh, man, this is only going to get worse, and I don't think I can watch this anymore. And even in the third quarter, we had another fumble. But you know what was different that day? I knew, because what he told me, that the Packers win 27-24. So you know what happened to me as things kept getting worse and worse throughout the third quarter? I kept getting more and more excited. Man, what's this fourth quarter going to be like? What's going to happen to turn it all around? They're still fumbling it. They're still getting sacked. He just threw another This fourth quarter is going to be fantastic because I know the end score. I wasn't going to let all this stuff get me down. Guys, we as Christians, we're going to look at our world. We're going to see fumbles and interceptions and all these things. We're going to see the government doing this stuff and politics going this way and morality going downhill at an exponential rate and everything. It can beat us down and it can defeat us. Or do we know the final score? Who wins in the end? We should just keep getting more and more excited because isn't God going to do something fantastic? The fourth quarter is going to be exciting. to see what God does. Guys, there is hope. We are going to go through some suffering. And it's for sometimes of our own making. Sometimes it's because our neighbor did something stupid. Or sometimes we did something stupid. Or sometimes it's just God refining us in the fire. But we can have hope and we can be excited because we know the final score. Would you bow with me for a word of prayer? Dear Lord, we thank you so much for the things that you teach us. We thank you for the ways that you've revealed yourself to us. Lord, as we've answered some of these questions, and Lord, I know some of them are technical, or some of them were, just a greater understanding. Maybe it was just the intellectual argument that we were having trouble getting over. Maybe, Lord, some of these have had great meaning to us. Because, Lord, it's important that we understand, why do we hurt? Why do you allow this to happen? Is it because you're mean and you're not all powerful, or you're not all good? Or is it because you want us to have the freedom to choose? And in order to do that, you have to allow others to choose. Because you love us so much, you want us to look to you. As Kenny said earlier, as those that were bitten by the snake would look to the pole and they would be healed. God, that is still your desire, that we would look to you and find hope and healing and find strength in your presence. Lord, I thank you so much for the things that you've done, the way that you teach us, the way that you bring us through and carry us through. And it's in your holy name I pray. Amen. I would invite you to stand with us. We're going to sing a song of invitation. If God has spoken to your heart, or maybe if you need to come and pray, or you need to talk to me or Brandon, or ask, we can pray with you or whatever, we're going to do that at this time as we sing this song together. Do not leave this place. If God is dealing you with something, as some would say, this might be your last chance. Who knows, right? If all the fear and everything is fully justified, then we're not long for this world. And you need to, if God has spoken to your heart, why wait till tomorrow? Why wait until 1 second? Don't even let him start the first verse. If God is dealing with your heart, you come and you get it dealt with this morning. Let's sing together.
Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me song, the Lord, yes, sonnet, song
Well, we want to thank you guys for coming. I know that this 3-service thing is new and a little different, and we're glad that you guys were here. We were actually, I woke up this morning with fear and trepidation that no one would show up. And I want to let you know that we had probably about 50 in our early service, in our first service. I think we violated our 50 rule a little bit in the second service.
Right.
Shh, don't tell anyone. Please don't sell us out. No, we can use our overflow. We didn't get permission to do that. And then in this service is a little bit smaller. But I'm so glad that you're here this morning. I hope you will come back next week. And I did want to share with you a small joke that I heard. They canceled all sports and everything, the NBA and soccer and XFL, even though I was watching more football and that kind of thing. And so the joke was, day 3 without sports. I met a nice lady that sits on my couch. Turns out she's my wife. I guess, I thought that was kind of funny until I shared that joke with my wife. She didn't like that one as much. No, I will say this, guys. I tend to be a little cynical, and I tend to be a little bit more less reactive to things, and I found myself being a little judgmental at the same time. And I've been reminded through others and through the Holy Spirit that it's not my place to judge. It's not my place to look down on anybody, regardless of how much toilet paper they've purchased or whatever, or however they've reacted. Guys, this is an opportunity for us to minister to those who need ministering to. This is an opportunity for us to share hope and peace with those who are afraid. This is an opportunity for us to be a light in the darkness in our community. So I pray that your prayer would be just as mine is. Lord, remove all cynicism, remove all judgment. Let's take this opportunity to minister to those, and let's share God's love with someone. Amen? All right. Please have a fantastic week. Be safe, be well, and we'll see you back next week.